Planet Earth has been relegated to backwater status among the planets of the solar system. Its long golden age of peace and prosperity has ended under ill omens. Long dormant tensions have re-emerged among the remaining human population of Earth. The feudal world state government of the ruling von Strauben Imperium presides over the turmoil in the areas of the planet where civilization still exists. A Japanese emperor rules as a figurehead over the planet. To survive the political intrigues in this age, the emperor took an American wife so he could heal the von Strauben Imperium. He wooed this young American to be his wife with 3 gifts. These gifts were the creation of a great inland sea in Kansas, the building of a great palace for her to rule in, and the capture of an asteroid named Ceres as Earth's second moon. This last gift had great consequences for the planet Earth. The gravitational influence of Ceres played a devastating role. It created new seasons of global weather that threatened to bring extinction. Ceres became known as a harbinger of change, and humanity too felt itself suspect to the changes. But it came with celebration as humanity gazed into the heavens to witness a great change begin to grow in their hearts. They left their homes to travel to the Sea of Kansas to answer the call of the young American empress who wanted to breathe new life back in the dying husk of the planet. The call was answered, and thousands of pilgrims died along the way by the oppression of the Earth's real masters, the Occupy Incorporated. Nonetheless, the pilgrims came, defying incorporated law. This is a story about 4 pilgrims who dared to make that journey. Sailor crossed the hunter-infested atolls of the California archipelago. He was careful to avoid the nearby port city of Viva Las Vegas. He was all too aware of the consequences of encountering each of these threats. He had lived a life on the seas of the Pacific. His life was like an old tattered map, and the experiences of his life had weathered holes into it. Behind him was the specter of life he had once lived and now existed no more. This made his face and who he was unobservable to all of those who encountered him in fallen California. He was a failed hero wanting of a new life to replace the one he had lost. He was a stranger in the land of his ancestors. He was the last sailor. The last sailor's wooden canoe grounded itself on the alkaline shores of the Utah coastline. He'd arrived in the kingdom of Deseret, a rogue state of people, grounded in religious theocracy and the simpler assurances of community. It was a place that was observant to the angels of heaven, and to make good with these forces of heaven which looked over them, the elders of Deseret quickly took in the stranger from the sea and gave him a place to eat and rest. The elders of Deseret then gave up their God-fearing advice that a Gentile would come from the sea, and the last sailor listened to them as they said to beware of the brotherhood of the dark knights of Moronai, who had left their mother church as saints and had become rebel angels in pursuit of holy war. All across America, they had turned the ground into graveyards. The last sailor was gracious for their help, but he did not stay. The next morning he crossed the Wasatch Range alone again into the Rocky Mountains. As he traveled in the cold mountains, he remembered the memories of his past life, a life lived on the seas of the Pacific. His life had really started there, formed by the pull of tight ropes as he had hoisted up the sails of the ships that had become the landmarks of legend. He could remember every port of call, the names and the faces of these people, as they belonged to the greatest fleet of ships on the oceans of the planet. They had been called the 500 strong, and its travails across the Pacific and all its islands have been a storied, constant journey. But the last sailor remembered bitterly, cursed was the life of all adventurers, and doomed was the sagas of all heroes by the fates of the gods. His life had become one of torment, and the deities of the cold blue ocean depths had forsaken him. And the last sailor arrived in the highest peaks of the Rocky Mountains in old Hispanic Colorado. Here on the backbone of the continent, where the ancient citadels of Sojourner, where dwelt the centuries-old tribes of women in monasteries, complete with the worship and devotion to the deity they called the horned goddess of the triune. They prayed daily to the lunar cycles of the moon, the Earth's original moon, Luna, huntress of the night. The tribes of women returned to the same cycles of life that were within them holy sepulchres. The last sailor watched us all from afar and guessed that the sight of the Earth's new second moon, Ceres, had inspired these horned women to new great lengths of ritual and worship of the powers of nature. Just as he had felt himself inspired by the sight of Ceres overhead his one-time Pacific seas, he knew that there were vast changes at work within the citadels of Sojourner. With Luna full and bright and Ceres resplendent and dark, the last sailor never could have imagined the new ritual that had been inspired by the sight of the new second moon. The tribes of women would welcome return of lost love, whether it be a daughter, a sister, a mother, or in the case of the last sailor, a husband. The last sailor fell asleep under the blue moon sky, and in sleep he began to imagine the strange unknowns that were at work within the citadels of Sojourner. In the beginnings of deep sleep, he had now become part of these priestesses' secret ceremony. He was in their mountains, and now in sleep, he was part of the ceremony that danced around him. He could not escape. He was made to peer deep in the fire of his own mental agony, the agony he tried to put away and forget. Instead, he was projected in this fire, and he saw his tragic drama before him. Like a glyph, his own skull was enstamped with the melancholy of his lost friends, his lost loves. But this pain was transcended by the nature of the magic upon him, and his own inner psychic eye was forced to project itself out from his own consciousness. He traveled out of his own body on a line lit by the power of magic, where the distance of traveling was vast, and a brief fade from all realizations. The last sailor, this tragic hero, now found himself flying over the flattest of lands where endless fields of wheat were underneath him. He saw in the distance a chain of mountains born of torture. He crossed these knife-like mountains and saw beneath him a great sea with calm tidal waves. In front of him was a rock island set in the middle of the sea, and on top of the island was a strange-looking palace. The last sailor realized that this palace was his destination. His soul sped towards the strange-looking island palace until he had reached it. Once there, he next realized he was not alone, and there was another person in his soul's presence. He felt that this presence was another soul, just like him. It was a young woman whom he could not see. Bizarrely, not being able to see her did not matter to him. It was her pleading words of worry and despair had become his only vision. Eerily, they became his only concern. A voice familiar with fatigue of tears and the humiliation of straining out to a lover to be held and not judged. I don't mind if we all die. The sound of her voice was the sound of cracking walls of strife. The last sailor heard a great sobbing hiding in the deep communion the young woman speaker had with hysteria. Where he would have expected to find the approachment of her shy cheek, there was instead the image of what the young woman was talking about. She was talking about her demons.
If you leave me, lover, don't think that you will be able to escape the truths of my heart that I have told only to you. At this time, the dark night of my soul, I still need your touch. But more importantly, I need you to listen to the darkness that lies inside of my heart. Tonight, I must know. Can you love the ugliness inside of me?
The force of her exclamation was her very own pain, and the last sailor saw her image for the first time. Revealing these secrets of hers was self-induced hemorrhaging. It was a wail of pain on the winds of the dead. There was no one more alone than her. Her visions of inner demons continued. There will be a time when the sun can warm my heart no more. I will grow old and I will be less the regal corpse than anyone else in the world who dies. I will die like everyone else and all my beauty will be gone. I've obsessed upon it my whole life. She sounded sad near death. Gone was all the beauty of her youth. And don't think you can choose the parts you'll get of me. You'll soon see the end of the world and expect to believe they are born of love. Her voice became meek as she ended her tally of inner demons. She collapsed weakly in her own self-pitying gravities. At this moment, the gales of the dead went through plains of the ghostly imprints of time. The last sailor called it the forever. It had not been since the last days of his old Pacific life that he even felt it. The young woman fell into his arms and he loved her. He loved her the same way a child cannot comprehend what it does that makes its parents smile and laugh. His love for her was an intuition. At the moment that the young woman shrieked a pain-racking plea for him to love her, the last sailor tried to make sense of why he did love her. It was when he invited rationality into his dream that the dream ended and he awoke. The cold Colorado night sky returned overhead in the land of the awake. He was back in the Rocky Mountains, where snow-capped peaks were the nurseries of the stars and the Via Lactea, one and the same with the potential to procreate. The dual moons of Luna and Saris had set hours ago. The last sailor was dwarfed by the sparkling eternity overhead and all around. He had found the forever, but he was alone